NBC's sitcom community was many things. Very, very many things, but one thing it wasn't was static. Actors, writers, showrunners all came and went. The show seemed determined, above all else, to shake up its tone, look, and just vibe at every chance it got. And this dynamism was equally present when it came to character. Some of the main cast, changed drastically over the 6 years they spent at Greendale.
You seem smarter than me when I met you.
Thank you.
Or 4 in this case, because I want to talk about Pierce Hawthorne. The ups and downs, the birth, death, and rebirth of this character, and see if we can make some sense of it all. What's the core of this character, and why does and doesn't he work? Now, if you're thinking, geez, Pillarman, this is kinda coming out of left field given the videos you've been making the past few weeks, sure, I guess it kind of is. But this channel's sort of like the Delta Cubes. I don't like to be pinned down by a dean or by a predictable video creation niche. Oh, it's also because this guy John Tovins requested a video on Pierce for like a while. And if people ask me to do a specific video enough times, if it's about something I've already, watched, I usually end up doing it, albeit months later. Season 1. Pierce 101. The Pierce we meet in the pilot is actually not a complete joke. He's still mostly a joke, but he does seem to be a semi-respected businessman. We're given no real reason to question this. He comes across as offensive and a bit harassy at times, even by 2010 standards, which is a little bit of a yikes, but it is mitigated by the fact that he isn't really being a prick on purpose. He's just lived a privileged, sheltered life, and can't really conceive of lifestyles and lived experiences beyond his own. He's self-absorbed, and from the start we get a pretty good sense of his other related major flaw, insecurity. This is probably the part of Pierce's characterization that'll remain the most consistent going forward.
I could reach into a man's soul and unravel it with one tug.
Cool, hit me.
You're bald.
So are you.
I'll kill you!
He's got this compulsion to be liked and respected by others. He wants them to think he's cool, and ironically, this impulse for instant appreciation often gets in the way of developing actual meaningful relationships with the study group.
I'm getting rid of Britta.
What am I doing?
I'm getting rid of the bee.
She's a no good bee.
I'm getting rid of Britta.
But there is something that mitigates this too. The unique quality which characterizes Season 1 Pierce, as opposed to his characterization in later years, is his willingness and ability to change, or try and change.
Pierce, give me your ear thing.
Got rid of it. We were designed by whatever entity you choose to hear what's in this range. Because you know who's talking to us in this range. The people we love.
He doesn't always succeed, he's rarely in the right, but in moments like this, we see there is a kernel of wisdom within the heart of Pierce Hawthorne, a little speck of insightfulness that shows itself now and then, and I think that's why a lot of people even now tend to prefer this version of the character. He was more 3D, more realistic, not so limited to the role of offensive old man. Ultimately, you could sum up this Pierce as a well-meaning but utterly oblivious fool. One who's got a lot of reflecting and growing to do before he'd be able to be a well-adjusted, net positive impact on modern society. But at this point, he seems capable of this personal growth, and we see it here, in little drips and spurts.
That thing some men call failure, I call living. Breakfast. And I'm not leaving till I've cleaned out the buffet.
Season 2, Downfall into Villainy. Things began to change pretty drastically in Season 2, with perhaps the major overarching story this year being Pierce's sort of villain arc. At its core, this fall from grace happens through a repeated pattern. Pierce gets excluded, so he acts like a tool, which leads to him being excluded more, and so on. I think we see this fairly clearly in the first real part of the heel-turn saga, Aerodynamics of Gender. At some point before the episodes start, the other guys had been playing with remote-controlled drones or something, and Pierce had felt left out, so he barges into this basketball game, which he wasn't there for because he was getting his own drone, and interferes when it turns out his drone didn't bring him the attention he thought it would.
Come on, Pierce, man, this is a
I can't control it. There's a little pilot in there.
Stop it!
It's after this that the trampoline is found. If you've not seen this show or this episode, this story may not make the most sense, so apologies, but we see Pierce missed out on that because, again, he was off trying to belatedly gear up for the basketball game he'd missed and helped end.
You dudes ready to shoot the rock after study group? I'm gonna slit your butts' throats. Nice catch, losers.
He ended up being excluded from that initial trampoline discovery due mostly to his own actions, and due to his actions, as well as perhaps more importantly their promise to Joshua, Troy and Jeff don't let him in on their discovery. Because of this exclusion, he pries, and upon finding the trampoline, he, acts like a tool.
Double bounce me!
Why are you doing this?
Double bounce me, do it! Pierce, that's enough!
This acting out, as always, comes back to bite him. And this accident leads to longer-lasting, almost season-spanning consequences. This dynamic is broadly the pattern by which Pierce intensifies the divide between himself and the study group throughout season 2.
I've been a jerk all year.
He's a jerk because we exclude him.
We exclude him because he's a jerk.
It's not always exact. It plays out a little differently, for example, in the episode where Pierce ruins the play, but that's the core of it. Pierce's own actions end up damaging his relationships, until at the end of the season, the group just about votes to kick him out. We'll come back to that, but it does bear mentioning that in the course of this collapse, Pierce does some pretty nasty stuff, like faking his own impending demise to mess with the group, and pretending to have called Jeff's estranged father.
It's starting to seem, from observing the others, that you're using the social leverage afforded you by your alleged deathbed to exact complicated acts of psychological vengeance on those closest to you.
Well, I have to catch a flight to Kathmandu, but I just wanted to say cheers through friends and Yvette. They're your true family now.
It's not entirely clear why the show decided to give Pierce this recurring antagonistic role. Maybe the show realized, even for the time, Pierce's racism, sexism, and homophobia resulted in a fairly unlikable character. Maybe it was to do with behind-the-scenes drama between Chevy Chase and Dan Harmon, which we'll talk more about later. Either way though, this villainy kind of works for the show. Episodes which pit the group against Pierce, such as Advanced Dungeons & Dragons or intermediate documentary filmmaking, are some of the show's best. And because this antagonism is more developed, more natural than, say, Napoleon Chang or the Air Conditioner Repair School, this conflict is more engaging. The whole time, this villainy isn't constant. Pierce does have some nice positive moments in season 2.
Whew. All right, where are we? Christmas train? I didn't want to go home. It's depressing there this time of year.
But generally, he stops growing. He stops empathizing with others' experiences. So even if this isn't a total heel turn, it does seem in many ways to be the downfall of that original Pierce. All this eventually comes to a head when he's pretty much kicked out of the group before speedrunning a redemption arc in the finale's paintball extravaganza, but the season ends with him seemingly poised to leave for good. Season 3, Curmudgeon and Punching Bag.
We have parted ways with our closest, oldest, craziest, most racist, oldest, elderly, crazy friend. And he's not coming back.
I'm back.
Yeah, he's back in season 3, with a lot of the rough edges shaved off. The whole first episode sort of functions to rehabilitate the character. Jeff wants him to stay out of the group.
I hope we did the right thing about Pierce. He really seems like he's changed.
What are you, nuts? That's what he wants you to think. Trust me, we're better off without him.
But this episode flips that pattern of exclusion around, putting Jeff in the role Pierce had played last year. This whole thing makes Pierce look a lot better by comparison, especially since it kickstarted season 3's habit of over-exaggerating its characterization. The episode concludes by critiquing the process of exclusion itself, rather than any personal actions or responses Pierce or Jeff take before or during this process, which largely works as a route back to normalcy, but to me feels maybe a little too simplistic. We see a similar thing a few episodes later in the episode Advanced Gay. The introduction of Pierce's dad, who out the worst spritter by a country mile, pushes us to look at Pierce with a more sympathetic eye. In his father, we see the roots of his dysfunctions, and the idea of Pierce as a semi-successful, if privileged, and out-of-touch businessman is well and truly put to rest. Hawthorne Wipe's success had very little to do with him. As a result, we see Pierce as more sympathetic, but also as more just pathetic. I never loved the way this episode affected the Pierce character, and I think now I see why. It takes away some of the blame for the way he acts, but it also takes away a lot of the character's sense of agency. We no longer understand Pierce's more repulsive traits as personal flaws he's responsible for, but as direct results of a shoddy and sheltered upbringing. When it comes to that cycle of exclusion and misbehavior, this development is interesting for the kind of chicken and egg dynamic it brings in, but this new understanding of Pierce as an elderly child, stuck in some sort of sort of arrested development does maybe cheapen his earlier issues, because now there's an excuse. This Pierce has a reason he didn't change his ways, break that cycle back in season 2. The original version of this character didn't. It works to reintegrate Pierce into the core cast and into our sympathies, but it does pay a cost to do so. Otherwise, these two episodes do work pretty well on the Pierce front, largely because they develop the Jeff-Pierce relationship, and that's always been one of the best aspects of this character, one we'll talk more about soon. For the rest of the season, Pierce kind of settles into the role of the old, curmudgeonly punching bag. He's kind of at peace with it now, though. The flip side of the fact that he's mostly stopped actively trying to develop or grow is that he's more at peace with his age, and his role as elder statesman, so to speak. So there's less friction which arises from attempts to seem youthful or cool. No, after that whole season 2 ordeal, it seems like Pierce is just happy to be there. Largely, the show seems happy to have him there too. For instance, I think there's a bit of a shift away from the more offensive Pierce gags to jokes at the expense of his age.
Come on, it wasn't all bad. I was there longer than anybody, and I'm fine. How are you? Why do you ask? 3:30.
Uh-oh. But from a writing perspective, this perennial role as the butt of the joke may have come from an emotional place as much as an artistic one. Dan Harmon and Chevy Chase famously didn't really get along during this general time frame, with the latter, for instance, leaving long, sweary voicemail rants for the former, and the former then going on to play one publicly on stage. Chevy also didn't like the shooting schedule, and on one occasion just didn't show up for a crucial scene. So it had to be cut. In any case, there's rumors that Harmon's treatment of Chase's character was influenced by these events, so maybe there's more to Pierce's new status as Greendale's resident punching bag than meets the eye. Season 3 Pierce does end on a kind of positive note though.
This place has made you so gay.
Hey, don't use gay as a derogatory term. Booyah, good person.
That's not much, but it's something. So maybe the Pierce of season 1 is still kinda visible here. Season 4. 1 step forward, 3 steps back. Aha, the gas leak year. I bet you're ready for me to lambast Season 4 and its take on Pierce, but I'm not going to. I think he's actually pretty good in Season 4, when he's there, but we'll get to that. There's some fun stuff, and he doesn't totally spin out when the others do stuff without him. There's even a kind of teachable moment where Jeff ends up actually connecting to this surrogate father figure as a result of the group's maybe slightly premature assumption that Pierce will go nuts if he sees them rolling out the red carpet for the new Whale.
Would someone please tell me why I've been shaving my own face all these years like a sucker?
I think this is as good a time as any to dig into the Jeff-Pierce connection, because it's a really interesting one. As I've suggested, they sort of see each other in familial terms. Jeff's the son Pierce never had, and Pierce is the dad that didn't run away. Various episodes explore this connection in various ways, but I think the real heart of it, the reason it works at all, is that these two are so similar. Remember that fundamental flaw we talked about earlier? Insecurity? The compulsion to be liked, respected, the center of attention. Yeah, that's Jeff too. The difference is, Jeff's life wasn't sheltered. He got through life by being able to play people, and he was great at it. But there's playing people, and then there's actually connecting to people, leaving behind the posturing and the facades, the big speeches. Jeff hasn't cracked that, at least at this point, and neither has Pierce. That's the core of their link. And the way the show develops it is great to watch, and even better to think about. Season 4, for all its flaws, doesn't lose sight of this. But this Pierce, the Pierce who's regained some of the equilibrium we'd really not seen since season 1, is there less and less as the season wears on. That's because even after Harmon got kicked from production, Chase kept being difficult to work with, let's say. At one point, production even paused because Chase dropped the gamer word, and his increasing discomfort with the shooting schedule meant he just kinda wasn't there a lot of the time. Some episodes just have him absent, and in others the character drops in and out of the narrative, seemingly at random. That's because before the 4th season had actually wrapped, Chase had called it quits. He was out. He dipped. Season 5, Death and Rebirth. Pierce isn't really in Season 5, not properly. A few episodes in, he's killed off screen, and there's even jokes about how much of a non-factor his absence is.
Do you guys feel weird about doing this without magnitude?
This is, of course, due to his season 4 departure. That was the real death of Pierce Hawthorne, the true death, and what we see in season 5 is merely the narrative adjusting to this fact. But now that the production process was freed from Chevy Chase, now that everyone involved had a bit of space from him and his character, there must have been something of a reappraisal behind the scenes. Because while Pierce is dead by this point, the show does something kind of unexpected, and resurrects him. Not literally, of course, Pierce doesn't return from the dead. Abed's tracking device proves that, but Pierce does come to have an impact on the 5th season, a pretty significant and entirely positive one. First, at the end of Repilot, Jeff comes into contact with what's essentially Pierce's ghost. I mean, it's a hologram, but I like this hologram, I like the speech, and I particularly like the later hint that Jeff maybe imagined this whole thing. That's an extremely powerful payoff to this connection the show played with throughout the years, and it feels fitting that this moment is, in many ways, the decisive choice Jeff makes to embrace interpersonal connections, reject his lawyering and manipulation, and return to the school and his friends. Next, and maybe more importantly, Pierce's death results in the episode Cooperative Polygraphy, which is one of this show's all-time best. There's a reason they picked this script for that Zoom reunion table read, because it's community firing on all cylinders. And even though Pierce isn't there, isn't in the room, he might as well be. This episode rebirths the character fully, without ever needing him to actually be there. The questions being asked, the questions Pierce left, the way they alternately tear apart and unite this circle is the perfect tribute to this character's weird, contradictory balance between antagonism and true friendship. This whole episode, and particularly the final gifting sequence, captures the duality of Pierce Hawthorne. Someone who could be a massive wanker, sometimes offensively so, but also a really genuine friend.
To you, I leave this bottle of fine scotch, so that you're less tempted to drink this cylinder of even finer sperm.
Pierce would have loved this whole mess, the chaos, the greed, and ultimately the acceptance. And hey, the fact that he was, in a sense, reborn like this, kinda makes you wonder. Maybe there was something to that laser lotus theology after all.
When a level 5's body stops functioning, it's vaporized in the Temple of Renewal and stored in an energon pod.
So, that's Pierce, in all his infamy. A complex character, a deeply flawed character, but ultimately a human one, a human being. If you've liked this portrait, this Pierce trait I've drawn, a like and some feedback would be massive. Videos I do outside of the big franchise names like Marvel or Star Wars often struggle to perform, so any engagement like that really goes a long way. You could help me out, actually. I really would like to do more stuff on Community, but I'm not sure what approach to take. Individually focused videos on characters or episodes like this one, or longer, perhaps season by season general retrospectives. Which would you rather I make? I'd love to know, so leave your thoughts below. Thanks for watching though, and a special shout out to all my patrons on screen now, especially Ian Fifield and Kevin Douglas.
Subbing to this channel's not the hardest thing, it's true. Cause when someone makes banger content, there ain't nothing else to do. Subbing to Pillar of Garbage, subbing to POG, please subscribe to me.